My name is Joyce Treasure, and I'm going to talk about my artwork and my art practice. But before I start, I just want to say thank you to Sandra Griffiths of Red Earth Collective and Birmingham Museums Trust for inviting me here to talk about my artwork and to speak with my colleague Garry, Stewart, and to discuss how the Windrush Generation has influenced my practice. So, as I've already introduced myself, my name's Joyce Treasure, and I'm a multi-disciplinary artist, and I'm based here in Birmingham. And I came here just over 3 years ago to embark on a Black Studies degree as a mature student, and I emphasise mature because it was a degree that was the first of its kind in the UK and in Europe, and I decided to take the degree course because it would inform my practice, as my practice is around colonialism and it's also around black identity. And it's taken me a while to come to deciding that I'm a multidisciplinary artist, because when I first started, I described myself as a mixed media artist, and as I've progressed and as I sit today, I've discovered that that I've used my lifelong skills, which are jeweler, photographer, prop and set maker. I've also done theatre work, and I've also done script writing, and so that's loaned itself to my practice, the multidisciplinary embraces multiple artistic activities that combine different experimental art forms, which has been, that's something that loans itself to my work. So I use the notions of the carnivalesque to, I use the notions of the carnivalesque through the black feminist lens and decolonial thought to explore and liberate ideas related to power. And carnivalesque is, it subverts ideas, it flips things on its head. So black becomes white, rich becomes poor, up becomes down, and etc., etc. And in this piece that I created in 2016, Equipoise, it was in response to the decision to remove Elizabeth Fry from the £5 note and replace her with Winston Churchill. And you can see here I've used a kind of character of 1950s white male character to point to patriarchy, and he's putting up wallpaper, and you can see that's Winston Churchill's there on the wallpaper, and that will be covering, when we remove Elizabeth Fry, who was a prison reformer and social reformer, who else are we removing at the same time? So on the back of her head, you can see there's a Benin bronze sitting on her head. So when we remove her, who else are we removing from our visuals? And so I can't really talk more about my practice without discussing, or I can't really, when we talk about Windrush, I need to talk about my dad, and he arrived in the UK for work in October 1960, and he followed his brother, who came in January 1960, and I was talking to Garry yesterday about this, and we were talking about how we can't generalize about Windrush, because it's not just the dock at Tilbury in 1948. There's a whole period, and there's some discrepancy about the dates as well. I've got 1948 there to 1968. However, there's periods that extend that a little bit further. There are some dates that go up to 1971, and some people argue that it's 1958. But he came in 1960. That's Vincent Joseph Treasure, also known as Roy. And he met my mom, Mary Elizabeth Treasure, and they married in 1966. And I was born in 1965. A year and a half later, after they were married, they were separated. So that meant that I could draw on to my, my mixed heritage, my mixed culture. So I had my Jamaican heritage and my British heritage. And when I first began to practice, my first set of work was these monochrome images that were figurative pieces taken from a book titled Appearances, and which was a fashion photography book dated from 1945 up to around 1970s. And in this kind of, in replicating these images, I was locating my identity in the images where my identity was missing. And this particular image that I titled Afro Jazz is an appropriation of an appropriation. So Anthony Armstrong Jones, also known as Lord Snowdon, married to Princess Margaret, he created this image, and it's a kind of take of a Lindy Hop style dance. So I've kind of programmed that image over his image, if you see what I mean. And so moving on, this piece is titled Litany for Those That See, and it's quite a big. It was quite a big piece made for an exhibition called Tribe, and it's made up of common prayer book pages, postage stamps of the Queen, and is acrylic and ink on paper, and this pays homage to enslaved Africans whose lives were lost at sea during the transatlantic crossing, and also points towards artifacts that were looted by the British when they did their expedition, the Benin expedition of 1897. This expedition crippled the Kingdom of Benin, which was a monarchy kingdom that was founded in 1180. And it's just to point towards how colonialism has impacted parts of Africa and assimilated. This kingdom was assimilated into colonized Nigeria later on in life. So I'm just going to see if I can... Yeah, and then what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk about through my work up to current date. So in 2014, I created this piece, The Girl with a Pearl Earring, and that points towards towards a famous painting by Vermeer, which points towards the Dutch Golden Age and the dark side of wealth gained through enslavement. And then the next piece that I created in 2017 is titled Mantle, and this is how roles are handed down and responsibilities forwarded, and how this conversation is always going through new iterations, and it also points towards the Earth's mantle and its interior mass. And then the other image, untitled rather, 2017. Points towards ancestral work, and in that image our ancestors are looking back out at the viewer in what's known as the oppositional gaze, and that was a term coined by bell hooks and coined by bell hooks that was written in her essays titled Black Looks, Race Representation. And that relates to the political rebellion of black persons' rights to look back. And so in 2016, my dad passed away, and at the same time I'd done a DNA test, and a year later I decided to go on a research pilgrimage, and I visited these. Also, that was coming up, but Black Studies was coming up on the horizon as a potential degree that I could pursue, and the studies, the research studies, the travels became a prerequisite to the Black Studies. So I started in Jamaica and went to Haiti, which Haiti really informs my work, my current work. Then I went to New York. Senegal was showing up on my DNA, so I wanted to visit Senegal. I went to Gambia, Ghana, and Nigeria was prominent in my DNA results, and so I wanted to spend time there. And then in 2017, I began my Black Studies course. And during my Black Studies, I then got invited to participate in a show which became a solo show, and that was titled Our Visual Cortex and Obscuridad. And in that piece, I was able to experiment with assemblage, which was, I'd learnt a lot of those techniques in Haiti, and I made this piece Gone with the Wind to point to how, given the location of that film, that the Black agency is loaning itself to stereotypes, and so what does this signal in terms of our learning and what we receive? And then in 2018, I was involved in a project with the Tate Exchange and Birmingham School of Art, and I created this piece, all the produce of the land. It was a collaboration with a colleague by the name of Luke Sewell, and he does lino cuts, and we worked, you can see his lino cuts in the background, and we did Adinkra symbols and an image of Queen Nanny. And then in 2019, I was successful in gaining a residency with Bruntwood and Grand Union. And at that time, that was coming towards the end of my Black Studies degree, and so I knew that I could kind of fit that in. I wrote my application around the idea that it would support my dissertation, and that I could present a body of work titled Hymns, and in that body of work. Let me just go back a second. So in that body of work, there were several artifacts, and the dissertation was titled Working Through the Legacy of Colonialism and Personal Trauma Using an Artistic Bricolage and Autoethnography. Easier said than done. And so I did a series of small small portraits, and I did assemblage work, and the work acted like a polyvocal of different voices that were all speaking to each other. All the portraits were of civil rights, either civil rights speakers or artists that challenged civil rights, and the body of work questioned politics, religion, hierarchy, and the themes throughout reflected segments of my Black identity from a subjective and social perspective. And finally, in the last piece, this was a film that was created. It was commissioned through Parallel State, and they wanted artists to respond to a new world, and so I created this art film, The Breakaway State, which was produced in 3 parts. So the first and second part was a performance film, and the third part was an artistic, it was a narrative that took academic writing, looking back. It was looking back from the future, reflecting back. So there was phase 1, 2, and 3, and yeah, that's thank you. That's it. I've taken a few snippets of my artwork, but I couldn't, obviously I just took a few pieces. I could say more about how my artwork has influenced through the Windrush generation, so there's artists that I particularly like, but I think, yeah, well, I think we'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Fantastic. Welcome, everybody, and there you have an amazing round of applause.